She stands in a rundown stall, heart pounding as the millionaire vanishes and leaves the injured horse to die. She grasps the trembling reins, determined to save the creature before his cruelty crushes them both. Under the relentless afternoon sun, the rolling hills of Birchwood Estate shimmered like a mirage. At first glance, the property radiated luxury. An ornate fountain sparkled by the tall iron gates, and flower beds brimming with imported blooms lined a pristine driveway. Beyond the mansion's immaculate facade, however, lay a reality its owner chose to ignore. Near the back of the sprawling grounds, behind the gleaming stables filled with well-groomed show horses, stood a solitary stall. Its paint was chipped, the roof partially caved, and the scent of neglect hung in the hot, still air. Inside that stall, huddled in dusty straw, was a sick and injured mare whose soulful eyes reflected only sorrow and resignation. Her ribs were starkly visible beneath a dull coat. Flies buzzed around the festering wound on her left flank, a raw patch that told of careless disregard rather than simple bad luck. Each labored breath made her sides tremble, as if the very act of inhaling were a battle. On the other side of the stall door, a man in a tailored suit tossed an impatient glance at the horse, then flicked open his phone to answer a call. He was one of the stable hands, though he dressed like a businessman, an oddity at first glance, but he took orders straight from the top. The top was none other than Brandon Huxley, a millionaire known for his cutting-edge investments and flamboyant parties, but not for his empathy. Only a day earlier, Huxley himself had stormed through the stable to see this mare for the first time in months. He'd scowled when he noticed the infected wound and the droop to her frame, cursing under his breath about the cost of medication and the fact that she no longer performed at shows. A year ago, he had bought her on a whim because someone told him she had potential as a champion, but the mare had never adjusted well to his high-pressure training regimen, and after a career-ending injury, she became another item on his ledger, a depreciating asset rather than a living creature. That morning, he'd simply waved a hand and ordered, "Get rid of her." Now, as the stable hand continued his phone call, the mare nickered quietly, ears flicking at the whine of a nearby horse being ridden out for exercise. Her stall was in a dilapidated section of the property, and the other stables, polished to perfection, housed horses more worthy of attention. Over the phone, the stable hand barked instructions to someone at a local auction yard. He would haul this mare away the next day, put her up for a meager sale, or more likely, arrange for her to be sold for slaughter. No sense in pumping more money into her care. Huxley's parting words rang in the stable hand's mind. "A worthless animal isn't worth my time." That same evening, across the county, 19-year-old Tessa Locke rushed between two part-time jobs, cleaning stalls at a small community barn and waitressing at a roadside diner. She lived with her grandmother in a rundown cottage near the countryside, barely making rent. Horses had always fascinated Tessa, though she could never afford lessons or fancy gear. Whenever she managed some free time, she'd spend it at the community barn, offering to brush the school ponies or help with feeding. Despite her limited means, her love for animals, especially horses, ran deep, intuitive, and almost fierce in its intensity. Late that night, as Tessa wiped down tables at the diner, she overheard two customers chatting about Birchwood Estate. They spoke about a neglected mare, an animal left to waste away. Their voices were laced with disgust for Huxley, whose name was becoming synonymous with arrogance. A jolt of alarm coursed through Tessa. The conversation might have been just another rumor, but a quiet sense of urgency gripped her. She couldn't shake the image of a suffering horse behind gilded gates, one that no one seemed willing to care for. Tessa's shift ended close to midnight, and though exhaustion weighed on her, she couldn't sleep. She lay awake, imagining the mare alone in a dilapidated stall. Over the past few years, Tessa had witnessed her share of callous behavior toward animals. But usually there was a rescue group, or at least some protocol for neglected livestock. Yet Birchwood Estate's influence was formidable. No one wanted to challenge the wealthy Huxley, who seemed to hold the entire county in his pocket. By dawn, Tessa had resolved to do something, anything, to help. The next morning, she managed to arrange a makeshift plan. First, she requested time off at the community barn. Her supervisor, noticing Tessa's determined expression, agreed. Then, gripping the last of her tips from the diner, Tessa called a cab to drive her to Birchwood Estate. She knew she couldn't exactly barge in, but she prayed that if she arrived with genuine concern, perhaps the staff might let her see the mare. Riding in the rickety cab along the estate's winding driveway, Tessa felt her nerves flare. The grandeur of the property was overwhelming, ornate landscaping and life-sized horse sculptures flanking the main house. Her heart pounded as they approached the stable area. She asked the driver to stop well before the polished buildings, stepping out onto the gravel with a sense of apprehension. A tall, broad-shouldered man in a stable uniform looked up, startled by the presence of a young woman in faded jeans and worn boots. Her hair, tied back in a messy ponytail, was more functional than fashionable. He squinted, clearly wondering who she was and what she could possibly want here. "Excuse me," Tessa began, her voice shaking slightly. I heard there's a horse here who's injured. A mare. I'd like to see her." His initial reaction was almost mocking. "You lost, girl. We don't offer free tours." But Tessa squared her shoulders. "Please, I'm not here for a tour. I'd just like to check on her condition." Something in her tone, or perhaps her eyes, made the man hesitate. He remembered the phone call scheduling the mare's removal for tomorrow. Shrugging, he muttered, "Fine, but don't say I didn't warn you." He led Tessa to the rundown stall, more hidden behind the main stables than she'd expected. There was no fancy signage or fresh bedding, just a door half-hanging from rusted hinges. The sight that met her eyes made Tessa's chest tighten. The mare stood trembling, trying to shift weight off an inflamed hind leg. Her coat, once a gleaming bay by the looks of it, was now dull and caked with mud. The infected wound emanated a sour odor. Flies danced viciously around her face. Tessa swallowed hard, stepping closer despite the stable hand's warning hiss. "Careful," he said. "She's skittish." Tessa moved slowly, extending her palm. The mare's eyes flicked with nervous energy, but her ears twitched forward, curious despite her pain. Tessa spoke softly, her words gentle and calm. "Hey, girl, I'm sorry. Nobody should have left you like this." Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes when she saw the severity of the mare's condition up close. The stable hand stood off to the side, arms crossed. "She's scheduled to go tomorrow." "Huxley doesn't want a useless horse." The phrase cut Tessa like a blade. She ran a careful hand along the mare's neck, feeling the quiver in each muscle. "Where are they taking her?" she asked, though she suspected the answer. The man shrugged. "Auction yard, maybe, or someplace else." His evasive tone didn't hide the real destination. In that moment, a wave of determination swept through Tessa. She didn't have much money, but she had a fierce resolve. "I want to buy her," she said, her voice clear and unwavering. The stable hand stared at her as though she were delusional. "You?" he scoffed. "You're going to buy a horse that can't even walk right. You got cash." Tessa fished the wad of tips from her pocket. It was pitifully small in the context of pricey show horses, but to her, it was everything. She recalled a friend's advice. If you offer a token payment for a horse deemed worthless, sometimes they'll just let it go to cut their losses. She hoped that logic held true here. "I know it's not much," she murmured, "but please, let me take her." I'll handle the rest." The stable hand's eyes darted between Tessa and the mare. Finally, he grumbled, "You're out of your mind." "But I'll talk to the boss's assistant." He disappeared for what felt like an eternity. Tessa stayed with the mare, whispering soothing nonsense, fighting the urge to cry. She knew if she let tears fall, the stable hand might sense her desperation and drive up the price. When he returned, a smirk curled his lips. "You're lucky." The big man said yes. He doesn't care what happens as long as the horse leaves by tomorrow. Relief crashed over Tessa like a tidal wave. She handed over the bundle of crumpled bills, ignoring his condescending snort. "It's all yours," he said. "Good riddance, if you ask me." Tessa didn't waste time bristling at his contempt. Instead, she turned her full attention to the mare. "We'll get you cleaned up," she promised. "No one's throwing you away anymore." Arranging transportation wasn't easy, but Tessa managed to borrow a small trailer from a local rescue volunteer she knew from the community barn. By evening, Tessa was gently guiding the mare inside, mindful of the horse's labored steps. The entire process was painstakingly slow. The mare winced with each movement, nearly collapsing once before they coaxed her aboard. Finally, with the help of the rescue volunteer, Tessa secured the mare and drove away from the estate. She didn't look back. There was nothing worth remembering. The trip to Tessa's grandmother's cottage took over an hour. The mare trembled, still unsteady, but seemed calmer in Tessa's presence. As they arrived, Tessa's grandmother hobbled out to greet them, leaning heavily on her cane. One glance at the mare and the older woman clucked her tongue, her expression a mixture of pity and admiration. "She's in rough shape," her grandmother remarked quietly, "but I see a spark in her eyes." Tessa guided the mare toward a makeshift shelter behind their small paddock, an enclosure originally meant for goats. The overhead roof needed patching, and the fencing was far from ideal, but it would have to do. Carefully, Tessa lowered a bucket of fresh water. The mare drank in desperate gulps, as if she hadn't tasted clean water in ages. Watching the horse's thirst, Tessa felt tears threaten again. She forced them back, focusing on the task at hand. She washed the mare's wound with disinfectant, layering a gentle salve to keep flies at bay. The mare flinched at first, but Tessa's touch never wavered. "That's it," Tessa whispered, stroking the mare's neck. "We'll get through this, you and me." Her grandmother stood nearby, offering bandages and words of cautious encouragement. "Don't overdo it. She's fragile." Tessa nodded, but inside, her heart brimmed with fierce resolve. She would do everything possible to nurse this animal back to health. That night, after the mare settled enough to rest, Tessa sat with her grandmother in their cramped kitchen. She recounted the sight of the estate, the arrogance of its staff, and the heartbreaking condition of the horse. "I don't know what it'll take," she admitted in a trembling voice, "but I have to try." Her grandmother placed a time-worn hand over Tessa's. "You have a good heart, child. Sometimes that's enough to do the impossible." In the dark, Tessa returned to the paddock, checking on the mare one last time. The horse lay in the straw, breathing heavily but more comfortably than before. Tessa crouched at the fence, her heart full of both hope and uncertainty. She had almost no funds left, no real veterinary supplies beyond basics, and no guarantee the mare could recover from the neglect. Yet somehow, staring into those weary eyes, she felt a connection, an unspoken promise that she would fight for this creature's life. And though Tessa couldn't predict the hurdles awaiting them, she understood one thing with absolute clarity. She had rescued more than just an abandoned horse. She had given both of them a chance to prove that compassion outshines wealth, and that every living being, no matter how battered, deserved a hand reaching out in kindness. "Tomorrow," she murmured softly. watching the mare's rhythmic breathing. Tomorrow, we'll start a new story together. The first light of dawn found Tessa awake, seated on an upturned bucket beside the mare's makeshift stall. Though her eyes felt gritty from lack of sleep, she smiled softly whenever the horse lifted her head to peer at this new, gentle caretaker. Overnight, the mare had stirred often, legs trembling, occasionally letting out low, distressed whinnies that tugged at Tessa's heart. Yet in those moments, Tessa would speak in a hushed, calming tone, telling stories of a better future. She vowed to keep the mare's spirit steady, even when her own fears threatened to topple her resolve. By 7 in the morning, Tessa's grandmother joined them, cane tapping lightly on the packed earth. The older woman carried a bowl of warm mash she had prepared by boiling oats with a dash of molasses. She pressed it into Tessa's hands and said, "See if she'll eat this." Tessa crouched, letting the sweet smell waft gently upward. At first, the mare shied away, wide-eyed and uncertain, but as Tessa offered a quiet murmur of reassurance, the horse lowered her muzzle. Her lips brushed the mash, hesitated, then began to eat in small, cautious mouthfuls. Relief bloomed in Tessa's chest. A willingness to eat was a sign that there was fight left in the weary creature. Morning chores demanded Tessa's attention. The goats bleated for their own breakfast, and the chicken coop needed fresh water. In between each task, she stole glances at the mare, making sure the horse was still comfortable. After she refilled the water trough, Tessa tested the mare's infected wound. It felt warm and looked inflamed, but at least it was clean from the previous night's washing. Tessa sighed. She needed real veterinary help, and soon. Yet the fear of a steep bill hovered over her like a cloud. She flipped through her phone's contacts, heart pounding when she reached the local vet's number. She'd only spoken with Dr. Lynn Jacobs a handful of times. The veterinarian had once visited the community barn to check on a retired pony. Tessa had listened wide-eyed as Dr. Jacobs patiently explained every step of the exam, her manner gentle but assured. If anyone could help, it was her. Summoning courage, Tessa pressed the call button. Dr. Jacobs agreed to come by that afternoon, though her tone carried caution when Tessa mentioned the mare's condition. "Infections can turn dangerous quickly," she warned. "Are you prepared for potential treatment costs?" Tessa swallowed. "I'll find a way," she said, trying to sound braver than she felt. After hanging up, she stared at the sky, silently praying that the cost wouldn't spiral out of reach. Around midday, Tessa borrowed her grandmother's old pickup to drive into town for a few extra supplies. Though her savings were nearly gone, she used the last of her cash on bandages, antiseptic ointment, and a modest bale of better quality hay. At the checkout counter, the clerk, an older man with kind eyes, asked about the horse. Tessa confessed she'd rescued a mare. His eyebrows rose, a flicker of sympathy shining in his gaze. "Sounds like you've got your hands full," he remarked, packing her purchases. "But good on you for trying." She forced a grateful smile, appreciating even the smallest show of support. Returning home, Tessa discovered her grandmother kneeling with surprising agility, rechecking the mare's flank. In the midday light, the old woman's lined face glistened with sweat, and Tessa felt a pang of guilt that her grandmother had been working so hard. "She seems calmer," her grandmother noted, patting the horse's shoulder. "But I'd say the infection is deeper than it looks." Tessa bit her lip, hoping Dr. Jacobs would arrive soon to confirm the next steps. Just as shadows began stretching across the yard, Dr. Jacobs' truck rumbled down the dirt lane. Her ponytail swayed as she hopped out, a black vet bag slung over one shoulder. She greeted Tessa and her grandmother with a professional nod, then turned her attention to the mare. Tessa watched the veterinarian's practiced movements, listening to the horse's heartbeat, checking gum color, feeling for swelling in the leg. When Dr. Jacobs lifted the bandage from the wound, Tessa caught the flash of concern in the vet's expression. "This infection isn't superficial," Dr. Jacobs explained gravely. "She'll need antibiotics. I also suspect underlying muscular damage from prolonged neglect." She paused, scanning Tessa's anxious face. "Are you sure you're ready for this? The medication alone could be pricey, and if she needs further care..." Tessa nodded quickly, even though her stomach churned. "I'll manage," she promised, voice quavering but resolute. She refused to give up on the mare just because money was tight. Dr. Jacobs administered an initial dose of antibiotic and taught Tessa how to properly clean and dress the wound twice a day. She also pointed out the mare's prominent ribs, advising Tessa on a careful refeeding schedule. "We can't overload her system immediately," she cautioned, "or we risk colic, small, frequent meals at first, then gradually increase her ration." After scribbling notes in a small ledger, Dr. Jacobs handed Tessa a prescription list. "I'll try to get you the best prices I can," she offered kindly. "But you need to be prepared for a lengthy recovery." That night, Tessa spread her bills and coins across the kitchen table, a lump forming in her throat. The medication costs, the ongoing vet visits. She had no clue where the money would come from. Yet each time she thought of giving up, she remembered how the mare had eaten from her hand, how her breathing had steadied under gentle care. Determination rose like a flame in Tessa's chest. She refused to let the mare slip away after escaping the misery at Birchwood Estate. To make ends meet, Tessa took on extra hours at the diner and volunteered for additional tasks at the community barn. Though she returned home each evening bone-tired, she never neglected the mare's needs. Twice a day, she scrubbed her hands, changed the bandages, and applied ointment around the wounded flesh, flinching in sympathy whenever the horse jerked in pain. With her grandmother's help, Tessa monitored feedings, slightly more hay one day, a bit of supplemental grain the next. Within a week, a subtle transformation took place. The mare started standing more steadily, and the haunted look in her eyes receded. The wound still looked angry, but less discharge seeped from its edges. Early one morning, as Tessa approached with fresh water, the horse emitted a soft nicker of recognition. That sound washed away Tessa's exhaustion in an instant. She reached out, gently stroking the mare's muzzle, overwhelmed by gratitude that the horse seemed to be forging a bond of trust. Despite these hopeful signs, the specter of expenses loomed. One late evening, Tessa sank into a chair by the window, listening to the hush of cicadas. Her grandmother shuffled over, wearing a determined expression. "I've got a bit stashed away," the older woman said. "We'll use it for the vet bills," but Tessa shook her head. "You need that money for your medications, Grandma. I'll figure something else out." The next morning, Tessa pinned an old sheet of paper to the bulletin board at the community barn. Seeking part-time side jobs, cleaning, horse-sitting, yard work. Willing to discuss rates. Several barn users were sympathetic, and by the afternoon, Tessa had lined up small tasks. Mucking stalls for an elderly boarder, mowing the property around the barn's perimeter. Every extra dollar would help keep the mare's recovery on track. 2 weeks into the routine, Tessa realized she still hadn't named the horse. It felt odd calling her simply the mare. That evening, she leaned on the paddock fence, scanning the mare's dark, inquisitive eyes. The flickering porch light illuminated the faint muscles beneath her healing coat. Something about her spirit reminded Tessa of resilience, of forging onward against all odds. When the mare stepped forward and nudged Tessa's arm, the young woman smiled. "How about we call you Phoenix?" Tessa whispered, voice trembling with emotion. "You know, like the bird that rises from ashes." The mare blinked, as though accepting the name in her own solemn way. From that moment, Phoenix's progress felt more personal than ever. Each improvement became a triumph, each setback a test of faith. Dr. Jacobs dropped by weekly, noting the mare's slow but promising recovery. Though the vet bill stacked higher than Tessa liked, she found small miracles in the local community. The clerk at the feed store extended her a little credit. A family friend delivered a bundle of second-hand tack, saying maybe Tessa could use it someday if the horse grew strong enough to ride. Every gesture reminded Tessa that not everyone measured life in dollar signs. Still, word of Tessa's rescue effort trickled through town, and not all responses were kind. A few customers at the diner whispered that she was foolish, that the horse was a lost cause. One man with a sharp laugh snidely remarked, "Why bother? The world's full of broken horses. You can't save them all." Hearing that, Tessa's cheeks burned, but she turned away without a word. She told herself that people who sneered simply lacked empathy. In her heart, she believed that if even one life could be changed by compassion, it was worth every sacrifice. Late one afternoon, while Tessa was tending Phoenix's wound, she noticed the horse's ears perk toward the sound of gravel crunching. An unfamiliar vehicle pulled up. Tessa's heart gave a nervous flutter. Her mind leapt to the stable hand who had sold her Phoenix, or worse yet, Brandon Huxley himself. But the figure stepping out wore casual clothes and an uncertain smile. He introduced himself as Seth, a volunteer from a nearby horse rescue. He'd heard rumors of a young woman caring for a neglected mare from Birchwood Estate. "Thought I'd see if you needed an extra hand," Seth said, glancing around at the humble setup, "or at least some moral support." At first, Tessa was wary, but something about Seth's earnest tone disarmed her. He approached Phoenix calmly, letting the mare catch his scent. She didn't flinch when he stroked her neck, and Tessa felt a flicker of relief. If Phoenix accepted him, perhaps he truly meant well. Over the next hour, Seth helped Tessa replace the mare's bandages, listening to her explain the refeeding plan. He nodded thoughtfully, occasionally offering bits of advice he'd learned from the rescue. When he left, Tessa felt a quiet gratitude that someone else cared enough to visit and lend a hand. That night, Tessa and her grandmother sat on the porch, sipping tea under the drifting stars. Exhaustion tugged at Tessa's eyelids, but she felt a certain hopefulness buoy her soul. Phoenix's wound was slowly closing, the infection no longer seeping so fiercely. The mare had gained a little weight, and her eyes shone with a subtle brightness whenever Tessa approached. Perhaps, Tessa thought, it wouldn't be easy or quick, but Phoenix was proving that no situation was truly hopeless. As a gentle breeze ruffled the trees, Tessa closed her eyes, letting the day's tension dissolve. She had no idea what challenges lay ahead. Vet bills, the horse's long-term soundness, or even the specter of Huxley if he ever took an interest in reclaiming what he'd abandoned. But for now, Phoenix was safe, healing, and forging a bond that money could never buy. Tessa felt it deep in her bones. They were two souls on parallel roads, each discovering that if you nurtured something hurt, but still full of heart, it might just bloom into a miracle you never expected. 3 weeks into Phoenix's recovery, the swelling around her wound had subsided enough for Tessa to attempt gentle walks. Each afternoon, she attached a soft rope halter to Phoenix's head and led her around the yard at a slow, careful pace. Though Phoenix limped slightly, her steps came with increasing confidence, as if each day's progress fueled a newfound determination. Tessa couldn't help smiling each time the mare willingly followed her lead. Ears perked at the promise of fresh grass and a bit of sunshine. But with small triumphs came heavy worries. Even with Tessa's patchwork income, extra barn chores, extra shifts at the diner, she barely covered Phoenix's medication and feed. One late afternoon, She found herself anxiously scanning the bruised sky, waiting on her grandmother's front porch for Dr. Jacobs, who had promised to deliver a new batch of antibiotics. The pickup finally rumbled to a stop, and the veterinarian climbed out wearing a sympathetic smile. Dr. Jacobs handed over a paper sack. "This should keep her on track," she said, patting the truck's tailgate. "Let's go check that leg." They walked to the paddock, where Phoenix stood nosing at the last patches of grass. Tessa's grandmother hovered nearby, her cane sinking into the soft soil. Carefully, Dr. Jacobs knelt beside the mare and eased away the bandage. Her practiced eyes took in the pink flesh, now free of foul-smelling discharge. "Much better," she murmured. "You've done a good job keeping the infection under control." A pulse of relief went through Tessa, but as she glanced at the small invoice Dr. Jacobs passed along, the pit in her stomach deepened. Even with the vet's efforts to discount services, it was another hurdle on top of the previous ones. She set her jaw, deciding she'd make do somehow. After Dr. Jacobs departed, Tessa guided Phoenix back under the shade of the shelter to rest. That was when she noticed a familiar old truck pulling into the yard. Seth hopped out, tipping his baseball cap in greeting. "Heard we might need some repairs on this shelter," he said, eyes flicking to the sagging roof beam. "Figured I could swing by." Tessa felt a wave of gratitude. She'd only known Seth a short while, but he always seemed ready to help. "Thanks," she said simply, kneeling to fill Phoenix's water bucket. "It's been on my mind." Seth grabbed a hammer from his toolbox, then climbed onto a ladder placed against the rickety beam. Over the steady taps of his hammer, he and Tessa spoke in low tones, discussing Phoenix's progress and the challenge of ongoing medical bills. "If the rescue had room, we'd invite her in," Seth said at one point, "but we're stretched thin with too many urgent abuse cases." "I'm sorry." A pang of disappointment struck Tessa, yet she understood. "I appreciate everything you're doing," she said softly. "Even just checking in keeps me hopeful." By nightfall, Seth had replaced a portion of the rotten wood, leaving the shelter more secure. Tessa offered him a cup of water, and he drank it quickly, dusting sawdust from his hands. "I'll come back in a few days to reinforce the sides," he promised. "Can't have Phoenix spooked if a storm blows through." Tessa watched him drive off, reflecting on how unexpected friendships often emerged from shared compassion. She lingered by Phoenix's side, scratching the mare's withers where she knew Phoenix liked it best. At moments like this, Tessa felt a fierce certainty. No matter how dire her finances became, she wouldn't abandon the horse who'd already survived so much. Late that evening, Tessa's grandmother insisted she get some real rest. Yet Tessa couldn't sleep, and when she did drift off, her dreams churned with images of large estates, glaring stable hands, and a looming figure in a tailored suit. The figure, perhaps the infamous Brandon Huxley, seemed to look straight at her with cold contempt. She woke in a sweat, heart pounding. It was just a nightmare, she told herself. But the anxious feeling lingered. Huxley had discarded Phoenix once. What if he suddenly wanted her back, or decided Tessa had trespassed on his property? The fear simmered beneath her daily routine. At dawn, Tessa returned to the diner for a short shift, flipping pancakes and refilling coffee cups while fielding the occasional question from curious patrons. Word had spread about the neglected horse she'd rescued. Most people voiced encouragement, though a few said it was a waste of time. One older gentleman, a regular, pressed a crumpled 20 into Tessa's hand. "For the horse," he said, winking before he ambled out. Tessa felt tears sting her eyes, touched by the kindness. Every small donation made a difference now. By mid-morning, Tessa hurried back home to administer Phoenix's antibiotic shot. She always talked to the mare softly before easing the needle in, wanting to keep her calm. Phoenix's flanks would tense, But then she would relax under Tessa's reassuring voice. Afterward, they would walk a lazy circle around the yard. Tessa's grandmother watched from the porch, wearing a faint smile each time the horse's ears flicked happily. One afternoon, Tessa decided to let Phoenix explore the far edge of the property, which opened into a gentle slope dotted with wildflowers. She led the mare by her halter, noticing that Phoenix seemed to relish the open view. Suddenly, a vehicle's roar disrupted the peaceful moment. Down the main driveway came a sleek black car, its tinted windows reflecting the harsh sunlight. Tessa's pulse jolted. She recognized that style of car from rumors about Birchwood Estate. Could it be? She looped the lead rope around Phoenix's neck, guiding the mare closer to the shelter. A sense of dread weighed on her chest. As the car parked, a tall, slim woman in immaculate attire stepped out. She had sharp features and wore an air of casual superiority. Peering at Tessa over the rims of designer sunglasses, she offered a tight smile that looked more like a sneer. "You must be Tessa Locke," the woman said. Her voice was clipped, each word measured. "I'm Rachel Morris, Mr. Huxley's personal assistant." A chill ran down Tessa's spine. She kept a protective grip on Phoenix's halter. "What do you want?" she asked, forcing her voice not to tremble. Rachel appraised the mare, her lips curling ever so slightly. "It's come to our attention that you have one of Mr. Huxley's horses," she said. "He'd like to see how she's faring, and if necessary, negotiate her return." Tessa's hand tightened on the rope. "He abandoned her," she said flatly. "Why does he suddenly care?" Rachel's gaze flicked to Phoenix's healing wound. "It's come to Mr. Huxley's notice that rumors are swirling about his alleged neglect. Certain reporters have been poking around." Her tone sharpened. "He'd prefer to resolve any misconceptions by reasserting ownership. Of course, he'll compensate you for your trouble." Fury churned in Tessa's gut. She stroked Phoenix's mane, trying to maintain composure. "She's not for sale," Tessa said, her words crisp with anger. "She wasn't wanted before. You can tell Mr. Huxley I won't just hand her back." Rachel Morris removed her sunglasses, revealing eyes that glinted with impatience. "Careful, Miss Locke. You acquired this horse under questionable circumstances, an informal sale. We could challenge its legality." She paused, letting that threat hang in the air. "Mr. Huxley is generous. He's willing to pay far more than the mare's actual worth, given she's essentially a money sink." Phoenix, sensing Tessa's tension, shifted uneasily, hooves clopping against the ground. Tessa's grandmother, observing from the porch, stood as if ready to intervene. But Tessa shook her head subtly. She wouldn't be intimidated. "I have a bill of sale," Tessa said quietly. "Your stable hand took my payment. This isn't about money, it's about what's right." Rachel exhaled sharply, as though dealing with a stubborn child. "Think carefully, Ms. Locke. You're struggling with vet bills, and you can't possibly fund this horse's full rehabilitation. If you sign her back, Mr. Huxley will assume all costs. She'll have a lush stable and professional trainers. Is that not better for her?" Tessa's stomach clenched. She knew the polished veneer of Birchwood Estate hid a callous disregard for animals. Phoenix would likely be shipped off again or sold to whomever offered a quick profit. "No," Tessa replied, voice shaking with conviction. "That isn't better for her." Rachel glanced around at the modest cottage, the patched shelter, the worn fences. A sarcastic twitch curved her lips. "Suit yourself. But remember, we can always contest your ownership." She turned back to the car, sliding on her sunglasses. "My number's on the card in the passenger seat. If you change your mind, call. Otherwise, be prepared for a legal headache." She swept away, leaving Tessa standing in the dust, heart pounding. Phoenix let out a snort, pressing her nose to Tessa's shoulder, biting her lip. Tessa steadied her breathing. "I won't let them take you," she whispered, stroking the mare's neck. She felt Phoenix's breath warm her arm, a reminder of how far they'd come despite every obstacle. Her grandmother approached slowly, leaning on the cane. "Sounds like trouble," she said gently. Tessa nodded, eyes burning with unshed tears. "I won't let them scare me," she said, pressing her face against Phoenix's mane. "She deserves better." Word spread quickly that Huxley's representative had visited. Seth appeared the next morning, quietly offering to reach out to his rescue contacts for legal advice. Dr. Jacobs heard about it too, leaving a short voicemail urging Tessa to stand her ground. The show of support touched Tessa, but fear pulsed at the edges of her thoughts. Could Huxley's wealth steamroll her meager defenses? Days later, as Tessa set out for another slow stroll with Phoenix, she mulled over her next move. She thought about contacting local news outlets or an animal rights group. Perhaps shining a spotlight on the neglect would force Huxley to back off. Yet Tessa hesitated. This kind of fight felt daunting, but one look at Phoenix, stepping carefully with a steadier gait and gently nibbling grass, renewed Tessa's conviction. By the time they circled back to the paddock, Tessa's anxiety and anger had fused into resolve. Even if Huxley dragged her into court, she would not betray the horse she'd nursed from the brink. She wouldn't let money and influence overshadow compassion. The mare was hers now, hers to protect, to love, to heal. They would weather whatever storm came next, side by side, each day forging a deeper bond that no threat of legal action could sever. Tessa remained resolute in the days after Rachel's visit, though dread shadowed her chores. She found herself checking the road at every noise, half expecting that black car to return. Each day was a swirl of cleaning stalls at the community barn, rushing through diner shifts, then hurrying home to tend Phoenix. The mare's leg wound continued healing, though she still favored the injured side over uneven ground. Tessa offered soft encouragement, guiding Phoenix around the paddock with slow steps and whispered praise, determined to see her become whole again. Word of Tessa's predicament spread. Some diner customers left folded bills or envelopes, murmuring their admiration. The barn manager discreetly handed over a bag of good feed, refusing payment. "You're doing good," he said. Tessa and her grandmother marveled at the kindness, though tension lingered. Huxley's intimidation riled people. Still, each gesture reminded Tessa she wasn't alone. She held tight to hope that goodwill might be enough to ward off any legal onslaught. A hush of gratitude fell over the little cottage each time they recalled how far Phoenix had already come. Despite this goodwill, Tessa knew a legal fight might loom. By dusk, she drove to the library, combing through references on equine law and court procedures. It was overwhelming. Still, she scribbled frantic notes, determined not to be blind if Huxley sued. A local reporter, Nancy Caldwell, worked in a corner desk. Gathering courage, Tessa introduced herself and outlined her story: neglect, the bill of sale, the ominous threats. Nancy listened thoughtfully, then gave Tessa a phone number. "If what you say is true, folks need to hear it," Nancy remarked, eyes glinting with curiosity. On the drive home, Tessa worried that involving the press might escalate matters. She also feared media exposure for Phoenix. Yet as she rested her cheek against the mare's neck that night, Tessa realized secrecy let bullies flourish. If Huxley wanted to intimidate her, letting the public see the truth might be the only shield. Phoenix nudged Tessa's shoulder as if sensing her turmoil. "I won't let them push us around," Tessa whispered. With each gentle breath from the mare, Tessa felt her own resolve harden, forging a silent promise of protection. Days later, Nancy Caldwell arrived in a battered sedan, camera in hand. Tessa's grandmother offered iced tea under the crooked oak, while Nancy asked about how Tessa discovered Phoenix and the day Rachel Morris appeared. Nancy took notes, snapped photos of Tessa's receipts, the battered shelter, and Phoenix's healing leg. Dr. Jacobs had provided a quote confirming the horse's neglected state. Tessa's grandmother chimed in, describing Phoenix's remarkable improvement. By the time Nancy left, Tessa felt both relief and apprehension. If the article prompted Huxley to retreat, good, but it could also provoke him. 2 nights later, Nancy messaged Tessa, "Story runs tomorrow." Early next morning, Tessa snatched a local gazette before work. Page 3 bore the headline, "Local Woman Rescues Neglected Horse." A photo showed Tessa gently stroking Phoenix, the horse's wound visible. Dr. Jacobs' remarks reinforced that the mare endured clear mistreatment. At the diner, customers whispered and offered kind words. The manager patted Tessa's shoulder. "We stand by you," he said. She felt buoyed by their support, though knots of worry still formed in her stomach. Huxley's clout was vast, and he wouldn't tolerate bad press easily. That afternoon, Tessa arrived home to find Seth waiting near the paddock, concern etched on his face. "Rescue folks are at capacity, but they send moral support," he said. "A friend-in-law says keep everything, photos, vet statements." Tessa nodded, heart thudding. Phoenix flicked her ears, sensing tension. "I have it all," Tessa breathed, "but will that stop them?" Seth squeezed her shoulder. "Don't underestimate truth." They walked Phoenix around, marveling at her stronger gait. The mare paused to graze, and Tessa's heart warmed. Despite looming threats, Phoenix radiated a quiet strength, fueling Tessa's determination. The next day, Tessa discovered a typed letter under the door. Huxley's letterhead proclaimed unlawful possession, accusing her of holding stolen property. The threat of all legal remedies hissed from the page. Rachel Morris's signature gleamed at the bottom. Tessa's pulse pounded, but she carefully placed the letter beside her purchase receipt and photos. She refused to crumble. This was about more than mere documents. It was about Phoenix's survival. Late that night, Tessa reread the letter twice. Clenching her jaw at every line, she resolved to fight, no matter the odds. That same evening, Tessa phoned the lawyer Nancy recommended. Her grandmother hovered in the kitchen, handing Tessa a cup of chamomile tea, while Tessa recounted everything, finding Phoenix, paying for her, facing new threats. The attorney listened calmly before explaining the reality. Huxley might press forward, aiming to wear her down with legal costs. "But your evidence is strong," the lawyer said. "If you stand firm, they could lose in court or at least suffer public backlash." Tessa exhaled, glimpsing Phoenix in the yard. She knew there was no turning back. Night settled gently over the small farm. Tessa strolled to the shelter, letter still echoing in her mind. Phoenix stood with her head raised, ears swiveling at the distant cry of an owl. Tessa ran a hand along the mare's neck, recalling the battered creature she'd first seen at Birchwood Estate. Now, Phoenix's coat shone with budding health, her eyes bright with the spark of trust. If Huxley dared to reclaim her, Tessa would show the courts and the world that Phoenix was more than a disposable commodity. She wasn't property, she was family. Over the next few days, Tessa juggled frantic phone calls to the attorney and Dr. Jacobs, desperate for statements that proved Phoenix had been neglected. She photographed the horse's wound from every angle, printing timelines of care. Seth helped gather testimonies from the feed store clerk and the barn manager who'd witnessed Tessa's early struggles. Tessa's grandmother quietly prayed each morning, reminding her granddaughter that good often prevails over greed. Despite late nights and swirling anxiety, Tessa found comfort in Phoenix's steady progress, each small victory a testament to love's resilience. Then came an afternoon when Tessa received a thick envelope from the attorney's office. Inside were drafted responses to Huxley's claims. They offered a counter-argument. Tessa's legal purchase, plus documented evidence of prior neglect, should invalidate Huxley's demands. "Sign here," the lawyer's note read. Tessa's hand trembled as she wrote her name, sealing her commitment. No more second-guessing. She would stand up for Phoenix's right to a humane life. The following dawn, a fierce wind rustled the yard. Tessa stood at the fence, scanning a sky streaked with ominous clouds. Phoenix trotted a few steps, favoring her injured leg less each day. Tessa breathed in the charged air. If a storm was coming, literal or legal, she would face it head-on. Phoenix nickered softly, as though echoing her resolve. Tessa pressed her forehead against the mare's warm cheek, finding renewed strength in that gentle presence. Together, they would endure. By evening, the sky unleashed a downpour, thunder shaking the cottage windows. Tessa darted to the paddock, draping a waterproof sheet over Phoenix as rain pelted her arms and hair. Her grandmother called from the porch, but Tessa pressed on. Lightning lit the horizon, each flash revealing the mare's calm, trusting gaze. Standing there, shivering, Tessa felt her heartbeat steady with courage. Beyond the storm, beyond lawyers and threats, they had forged a bond unbreakable by fear or greed. Whatever trials came next, they would face them side by side, undaunted, unwavering, and bound by hope. The storm raged well into the night, thunder rolling across the fields as rain battered the cottage roof. Tessa had trouble sleeping, her mind racing with possible scenarios of how Huxley might strike next. She pictured lawyers arriving unannounced, or some cunning move to discredit her. Yet every time anxiety swelled, she remembered the warmth of Phoenix's muzzle pressing against her palm, how far they had come. At dawn, the clouds parted enough for a weak sunlight to filter through, illuminating puddles that glistened across the yard. Tessa ventured out to check on Phoenix, who greeted her with a gentle whinny. The mare's resilience amazed her. Though the storm had rattled the fences and scattered branches, Phoenix stood calm, as if confident that Tessa's presence guaranteed safety. Tessa's grandmother emerged next, cane tapping on the sodden ground as she gingerly skirted the largest puddles. She offered a weary smile. "Everything seems intact," she said, scanning the battered yard. The roof didn't leak, and the fences held. Tessa nodded, exhaling relief. Together they walked Phoenix around the perimeter, taking stock of fallen limbs. Whenever lightning had flashed overnight, Tessa imagined the mare spooking, but Phoenix looked more relaxed than ever. Perhaps her time in Tessa's care had taught her to trust that storms passed and shelter was near. As they reached the patch of tall grass by the gate, Phoenix halted, muzzle dipping to graze. Tessa's grandmother patted Tessa's shoulder gently. "She's come a long way," she murmured. "Now it's your turn to be brave." Seth arrived mid-morning, truck rattling with salvaged lumber and nails. He'd promised to reinforce a leaning fence post near Phoenix's shelter. "Heard the storm got wild?" he said, hopping out. "Anything I should know?" Tessa shook her head, but her tense shoulders told another story. She described the letter from Huxley's lawyer, voice tight with anger and worry. Seth's brow furrowed, and he set his tools down, giving Tessa his full attention. "They're trying to scare you," he said. "If it was a solid case, they'd have served proper papers by now." Tessa wondered if that was true, or just a delay. Together, they walked the fence line, discussing options. While Seth hammered a new crossbeam, Tessa knelt beside Phoenix, letting the mare's peaceful presence soothe her rattled nerves. Peace. By midday, the sky turned heavy with humidity, promising another storm soon. Tessa decided to give Phoenix a quick sponge bath, removing the mud splatters left by last night's deluge. Guiding the mare near the hose, she gently ran cool water over Phoenix's coat, watching rivulets of brownish grime swirl away. Phoenix stood quietly, her eyes half closed as though savoring the care. Tessa's grandmother peered from the doorway, smiling at the tender scene. Moments later, the phone rang inside, its shrill tones slicing through the afternoon calm. Tessa hastily patted Phoenix dry before sprinting in. On the line was the attorney, his voice cautious. "I've received a formal complaint from Huxley's legal team. They intend to pursue ownership. I suggest we prepare for a preliminary hearing." Tessa's stomach twisted uncomfortably. Stunned, Tessa gripped the phone. The attorney explained that Huxley's complaint alleged Tessa's purchase was void, claiming the stable hand had no authority to sell. "They're moving fast," he added, "which means we must respond immediately." Tessa thanked him, hung up, and sank into a chair. Her grandmother hovered in the doorway, face etched with concern. Outside, Phoenix nickered, unaware that her future hung by a thread. A swirl of panic seized Tessa. She imagined a judge ruling in favor of Huxley, leaving her powerless as Phoenix vanished back to that gilded prison. At length, she stood, inhaling shakily. No matter how anxious she felt, Phoenix needed her calm. Tessa would gather every shred of evidence, receipts, photos, veterinarian statements. She refused to let fear dictate the mare's fate. She resisted. That evening, as thunderheads gathered again on the horizon, Tessa spread out all her documentation on the kitchen table. Her grandmother brewed strong coffee to keep them alert. One by one, Tessa sorted receipts, the meager sum she'd paid at Birchwood, the feed and medical bills, plus photos of Phoenix's deteriorated condition at purchase. She included Dr. Jacobs's notes, which confirmed severe neglect predating Tessa's rescue. When Seth arrived, he brought typed affidavits from the barn manager and the feed store clerk, each verifying Tessa's commitment to the mare. Their statements painted a vivid picture of Huxley's indifference. "This is solid evidence," Seth murmured, organizing papers into a neat folder. Outside, lightning flickered, reflecting in the window. In Tessa's mind, it symbolized the storm of confrontation rapidly approaching. Time pressed. The following day, Tessa's phone buzzed with a message from her attorney. Preliminary hearing set for next Thursday morning. She felt adrenaline spike, followed by dread. That left barely a week to finalize preparations. Dr. Jacobs agreed to attend and testify, offering professional insight into Phoenix's neglected state. The barn manager cleared his schedule to support Tessa. Even Nancy Caldwell, the reporter, promised to document proceedings. Meanwhile, Tessa had to juggle her part-time jobs, caring for Phoenix and countless phone calls with the lawyer. Nerves clamped her stomach each time she pictured a courtroom. But whenever she felt close to panic, she reminded herself the truth was on her side. Huxley could flaunt his wealth, but he couldn't alter the mare's scars or the undeniable evidence of abandonment. She persisted. That evening, Tessa lingered by Phoenix's stall, heart pounding with a mix of fear and resolve. She replayed the upcoming hearing in her mind, a stern judge, Huxley's lawyers presenting twisted arguments, the quiet hush of a courtroom. Yet, as she stroked Phoenix's muzzle, she sensed their bond had forged something unbreakable. Phoenix, once too weak to stand properly, now walked with a confidence born of careful healing and unwavering love. Tessa whispered, "I promise I won't let them take you." The mare's calm, trusting gaze answered unspoken. Rain clouds gathered overhead again, but Tessa hardly noticed. She fetched fresh hay and water, then hummed a soft tune as Phoenix ate. In the background, thunder rumbled low, reminding Tessa that storms, like trials, passed eventually, yet courage could endure. She believed. In the days leading up to Thursday, the town buzzed with talk of the impending showdown. At the diner, customers offered hushed encouragement. Some insisted Tessa was brave. Others murmured that Huxley was bound to back down, not wanting more negative press. Still, Tessa braced for anything, or... Nights blurred as she hunched over her notes, practicing how to calmly explain that the stable hand had indeed accepted her payment, that Phoenix was essentially left to die. Seth visited often, reminding her that many in the community stood behind her. Dr. Jacobs dropped by, finalizing her official statement. Each kindness fanned Tessa's determination. Meanwhile, Phoenix improved steadily, her coat regaining a healthy sheen. Seeing the mare's eyes shine like polished amber, Tessa felt a surge of hope for the trial. Always. Finally, the morning of the hearing arrived, crisp and cool under a steel-gray sky. Tessa dressed in her best outfit, simple slacks and a white blouse, hands trembling as she buttoned each cuff. Her grandmother offered a silent hug. Outside, Seth waited in his truck, Dr. Jacobs seated in the back. The drive to the courthouse felt surreal. Farmland gave way to neat suburban streets, eventually merging into the town's modest civic center. Tessa breathed deeply, reminding herself that justice wasn't just for the wealthy. In a small hallway near the courtroom, she found her attorney reviewing papers. "We're ready," he said, voice steady. Tessa nodded, heart pounding. Through the double doors, she glimpsed Huxley's sleek lawyers. The battle for Phoenix was about to begin, each side convinced of victory. She exhaled. Tessa's footsteps felt strangely loud as she stepped into the courthouse hallway, trying to steel her nerves before facing the judge who would decide Phoenix's fate. Her attorney, a calm man with thinning hair, stood by the wooden doors, scanning paperwork one last time. Dr. Jacobs offered Tessa a reassuring squeeze on the arm, while Seth nodded encouragingly. Beyond them, Tessa could see two suited figures, Huxley's lawyers, conversing in hushed tones. A hush pervaded the corridor, interrupted only by the occasional squeak of shoes on polished floors. Tessa swallowed hard, trying to steady her breathing. The day she had feared was finally here, and she refused to falter. Phoenix depended on her. Inside the courtroom, the air was cool and tinged with disinfectant. Rows of benches faced the raised platform where the judge would preside. Tessa and her supporters took seats near the front, hearts pounding in unison. Huxley's legal team glided in, crisp suits gleaming, portfolios tucked under their arms. Tessa felt a chill at the realization that Huxley himself was absent. He had sent his representatives instead, a silent declaration that she wasn't worth his personal time. The bailiff called the session to order, and the judge, a stern woman with silver hair neatly pinned, entered. Tessa clasped her hands together and tried to exhale her tension. Once the formalities concluded, the lead attorney for Huxley's side rose. His voice was smooth, each syllable precisely measured. He spoke of ownership rights and contractual invalidity, claiming that Tessa's payment to a mere stable hand held no legal standing. The horse, he stated, had always been Mr. Huxley's property. The attorney paused for effect, then added that Tessa's unauthorized possession could be seen as theft. Murmurs rippled through the handful of spectators, and Tessa felt indignation flare. She knew Phoenix was no stolen animal. She had paid the stable hand fair and square, saved Phoenix from certain misery. Closing his argument, Huxley's lawyer demanded the immediate return of the horse to his client, with an additional claim for damages. Tessa's attorney responded calmly, standing with measured dignity. He described in detail how Tessa discovered the mare abandoned, neglected, and in obvious distress. Photographs and veterinary evidence confirmed the horse's severe infection and malnourished condition. He handed copies of Tessa's purchase receipt to the judge, along with witness statements from the barn manager, the feed store clerk, and even the stable hand who had accepted Tessa's money. As each piece of evidence was presented, Tessa saw the judge's expression shift subtly. The glare of polished rhetoric from Huxley's team contrasted starkly with the tangible proof of the mare's dire state. When Tessa's attorney concluded, Tessa felt a surge of hope. Every document, every tearful recollection, stood as a shield against Huxley's hollow claim. The judge frowned, eyes flicking between the sets of paperwork. "We will hear from direct witnesses," she announced, summoning Dr. Jacobs first. With a steady gait, Dr. Jacobs approached the witness stand. Under oath, she recounted the injuries she had treated, emphasizing that the mare would have deteriorated rapidly without Tessa's intervention. Huxley's lawyer attempted to undermine her testimony, suggesting that the horse's infection did not necessarily prove neglect from the owner. But Dr. Jacobs calmly refuted every insinuation. She explained that the injury was untreated and advanced, a strong indication of prolonged inattention. When the attorney hinted that Tessa might have exaggerated the mare's injuries to justify keeping her, Dr. Jacobs's eyes flashed with quiet anger. "These X-rays and infection cultures do not lie," she said firmly, tapping a paper. "Without timely care, that horse would likely have died." Next came the barn manager, an older man with a no-nonsense demeanor. He confirmed that Tessa had arrived one day, distraught over a horse in dire condition. He'd seen her drive off with a borrowed trailer to fetch the mare. On cross-examination, Huxley's lawyer questioned his awareness of the stable hand's authority to sell the horse. The manager shrugged, replying that in many barns, stable hands handle auctions and routine transactions, especially for horses deemed worthless. A ripple of reaction moved through the onlookers at his blunt words. Worthless. Tessa felt her cheeks burn. Phoenix was anything but worthless. Then Tessa herself took the stand. Her heart thumped as she raised her right hand and swore to tell the truth. Nervous energy fluttered in her chest, yet she forced herself to meet the judge's gaze. She recounted every detail: the hush at Birchwood Estate's neglected corner, the infected wound, the bundle of tips she used to buy the horse outright. Her voice trembled as she described the desperation in Phoenix's eyes. "No one should have to watch a living being suffer like that," she said, swallowing back emotion. The judge regarded her with a grave, thoughtful expression. When Huxley's lawyer strode forward, his tone became razor-sharp. "Is it not true that you trespassed on private property?" he began. Tessa bristled, but answered truthfully that she'd arrived through the main driveway and spoke to the stable hand, who granted her permission. "And can you confirm you received no formal bill of sale, only an exchange of cash?" Tessa bit her lip, clarifying that the stable hand scrawled a receipt on a slip of paper acknowledging payment. The lawyer tried to paint that piece of paper as insignificant. Tessa held her ground, explaining that it was the only transaction record the stable hand had offered, and she believed it valid. The lawyer's final salvo suggested she manipulated a vulnerable situation to gain a horse cheaply. Tessa felt a flash of indignation. "I saw a horse in pain," she retorted. "I did what any compassionate person would do." The hearing adjourned for a short recess while the judge weighed the evidence. Tessa slumped onto the bench, palms sweating, head spinning with possibilities. Seth slipped beside her, offering a whispered, "You did great." "It's clear you acted in the horse's best interest." Dr. Jacobs nodded, and Tessa's grandmother patted her hand. Across the aisle, Huxley's lawyers conferred in hushed voices, their expressions stern. Tessa forced herself not to stare. She prayed the judge would see that her motives were genuine and that Huxley's sudden claim on Phoenix was purely to save face. When court resumed, the judge leaned forward, her features schooled into impartial composure. She began by acknowledging that ownership disputes involving animals can be complex, especially with limited documentation. However, she noted the compelling evidence of neglect. "It appears," the judge said slowly, "that Miss Locke purchased the horse in good faith. Though the stable-hand's authority is not fully established, there is substantial proof that the horse's original owner had abandoned its care." Tessa's heart galloped. The judge continued, explaining that pending a more exhaustive legal process, she was inclined to allow the horse to remain under Tessa's custodianship, given that immediate return to Huxley could jeopardize the animal's well-being. "A final determination on ownership may require a trial," the judge added, "but for now, the mare remains with Miss Locke under a protective order." Thunderous relief coursed through Tessa, tears flooding her eyes. Seth gripped her shoulder, and Dr. Jacobs exhaled in quiet victory. Though the judge hadn't granted permanent ownership outright, it was a crucial step, a chance to protect Phoenix from abrupt seizure. Huxley's lawyers murmured among themselves, frustration clouding their expressions. The judge concluded that a more formal hearing might be set if Huxley chose to pursue the matter further. But Tessa was permitted to keep caring for the mare in the meantime. With a rap of the gavel, the session ended. Emerging into the corridor, Tessa let out a trembling breath. She felt as though she had run a marathon, each second of testimony an uphill climb. Her lawyer clapped her gently on the back. "Well done," he said. "This is good news, though not the end. If Huxley pushes for a trial, we'll prepare." Tessa nodded, heart still racing. Yet the immediate danger had passed. Phoenix would remain safe in her paddock. No black car would arrive with a court order to snatch the mare. For now, that was enough. Outside, the crisp air felt sweeter than ever. Tessa's grandmother fished a tissue from her purse, dabbing at Tessa's tears. "You stood up for what's right," the older woman said, voice full of pride. "And it showed, Doctor." Jacobs gave Tessa a warm smile, and Seth announced they should celebrate with a simple meal at the diner. Though Tessa's limbs still shook, she mustered a grin, relieved to be free of the tension inside that courtroom. As they headed to the parking lot, Huxley's attorneys brushed past without a word, disappearing into a polished sedan. Tessa wondered what new strategies they might hatch, but for now, her mind was on Phoenix. She longed to hurry back home, cradle the mare's soft muzzle, and whisper the outcome: she was staying put. On the drive, Tessa gazed at the farmland rolling by, imagining the moment she would throw her arms around Phoenix's neck and promise that no one could tear them apart. This hearing was just the beginning, but it proved that compassion held power even against wealth and intimidation. Tessa vowed she would see it through to the end, however long it took, so Phoenix would never again be cast aside. The drive back from the courthouse felt like a blur of relief and fatigue. Tessa sat in the passenger seat of Seth's truck, eyes fixed on the passing fields, barely registering the brilliant afternoon sun, though she had won a partial victory, securing Phoenix's right to remain under her care for now. Her mind spun with all that still lay ahead. The judge had made it clear that the dispute could escalate into a full trial if Huxley refused to back down, and Tessa braced herself for that possibility. For the moment, though, one truth warmed her heart. Phoenix would greet her at home, safe and free from immediate threat. When they pulled up to the cottage, Tessa spotted her grandmother on the porch, a hand shielding her eyes from the sun. At the sight of the truck, The older woman lifted her cane in greeting. Tessa climbed out, and her grandmother hobbled forward, relief flooding her lined face. "I've been praying non-stop," she said, voice quivering. "I knew deep down that Judge would see the truth." Tessa wrapped her in a fierce hug, tears blurring her vision. Though a final battle might loom, for now she savored the reprieve. Eager to see Phoenix, Tessa hurried to the paddock, heart pounding with anticipation. There stood the mare, nosing through a patch of fresh grass. At the soft sound of Tessa's approach, Phoenix raised her head, though she could never understand the intricacies of legal proceedings. She sensed Tessa's mood. With a gentle whicker, the mare ambled over, pressing her muzzle into Tessa's outstretched hands. Tessa leaned forward, whispering, "We did it." "You're still home." Phoenix's breath ruffled a stray piece of Tessa's hair, and Tessa let out a shaky laugh, happiness bubbling up after days of fear. Seth, having parked and retrieved the folder of court documents, joined them by the fence. He stroked Phoenix's neck, shaking his head in quiet admiration. "She's looking better by the day," he noted, running a hand along the mare's shoulder. Indeed, the coat that once lay dull and matted now gleamed with emerging health, and Phoenix carried herself with a confidence that hinted at her old vitality. Dr. Jacobs had said the mare might never be fully sound for rigorous riding, but Tessa took comfort in each step that seemed freer than the last. As dusk gathered, Tessa's grandmother insisted they all share a simple supper at the kitchen table. Over steaming bowls of stew, Tessa relayed the details of the hearing, the lines of questioning, and the judge's final decision. Her grandmother listened closely, then shook her head. "Huxley's not used to being told no," she said with a sigh. "But times change. Maybe he'll realize you're not an easy mark." Seth agreed that Huxley might be reluctant to pursue a prolonged public spectacle, especially with the local press taking note. Yet Tessa couldn't shake the apprehension that lingered, a sense that the millionaire's pride wouldn't let him surrender so easily. Despite the unspoken tension, the mood over dinner stayed light. Each victory, however partial, deserved recognition. Afterward, Seth headed home, promising to return for more fence work the next day. Tessa and her grandmother stepped out onto the porch, letting nightfall embrace them. Crickets chirped in the tall grass, and a scattering of stars flickered overhead. Tessa found herself gazing into the darkness, contemplating how much her life had changed since the day she first laid eyes on Phoenix. In the silence, she felt the stirrings of a deeper purpose, the realization that caring for this horse transcended personal challenge. It was a statement of compassion, a stand against those who treated living creatures as disposable. She shivered, half from the evening chill, half from the magnitude of that calling. Morning brought chores and renewed determination. Tessa rose early to feed Phoenix, carefully measuring out the mare's portions, mindful of Dr. Jacobs's caution about overfeeding. Phoenix swung her head around, gentle impatience in her eyes, as though she had grown accustomed to timely meals and a soothing voice. Tessa chuckled, stroking the mare's neck. "No more going hungry," she murmured. "You've got a whole village looking out for you now." Phoenix's ears flicked, and she began to eat, contentment evident in every bite. The sight filled Tessa with gratitude. Just weeks before, the mare had been skeletal and trembling, cast aside as worthless. Now, she moved with a grace that hinted at her former promise. Later that day, Dr. Jacobs arrived for a routine checkup. She crouched by the old injury, nodding approvingly at the clean pink scar tissue forming. "We'll keep an eye on any lingering stiffness in her hock," she said, running practiced fingers along the mare's leg. "But this is remarkable progress. You've given her the best shot at a normal life." Tessa smiled, relief washing over her like a cool breeze. Dr. Jacobs, removing her stethoscope, added, "I know court battles aren't over yet." If you need me to testify again, I will. This horse deserves every chance. By mid-afternoon, Tessa settled into her truck for a shift at the diner. The country roads unfurled before her, golden fields rolling under a vivid sky. She marveled at how daily life had changed, no longer just about making ends meet, but about preserving a life that depended on her. Each night, she combed through legal documents, bracing for the next step Huxley might take. Perhaps it would be an appeal or a push for a final trial date. She'd face it head-on, knowing Phoenix was at home. Content gave her courage. At the diner, an unfamiliar customer at the counter caught her eye. He wore pressed slacks and a crisp shirt that looked out of place in the humble establishment. A faint sense of unease pricked Tessa's senses, but she greeted him politely. He asked for coffee, voice measured and polite, yet his gaze lingered on Tessa more than seemed normal. As she poured the steaming liquid into a chipped mug, the man mentioned, "I read about your horse situation. Quite the story." Tessa stiffened, offering a brief nod. "We're managing," she said. His thin smile didn't reach his eyes. "Best of luck," he murmured, then returned to his reading. Unease churned in Tessa's stomach for the rest of her shift. She couldn't help wondering if he was connected to Huxley or just a curious stranger. When her shift ended, she drove home, anxious to return to the comforting presence of Phoenix. She found Seth at the paddock, finishing repairs on a gate hinge. "Hey," he said, noticing her tense posture. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Tessa recounted the strange encounter with the well-dressed customer. Seth's jaw tightened slightly. "Might be nothing," he said, but the worry in his eyes mirrored Tessa's. "Just keep your guard up. Huxley's folks like intimidation tactics." The next day, Tessa awoke to a damp morning drizzle. She pulled on her boots and headed outside, checking Phoenix and counting the goats in their pen. The mare stood peacefully, ignoring the soft rain that slicked her coat. Tessa brought a brush and gently combed out the tangles in Phoenix's mane, humming under her breath. The routine steadied her. Over the past weeks, she'd learned that consistent, loving care formed the bedrock of trust. Phoenix had once been frightened, hurting, and near hopeless. Now, she leaned into each gentle stroke, eyes half closed in contentment. A few hours later, the phone rang in the house. Tessa's grandmother answered, her voice rising in surprise. Tessa hurried inside and found her grandmother wearing an uncertain expression. "It's for you," she said, pressing the receiver into Tessa's hand. "They say they're a journalist." Tessa's pulse quickened. "Hello?" she managed, bracing herself. On the other end, a cheerful voice introduced herself as Paula from a regional news outlet. "I'd love to interview you about your horse rescue," Paula said brightly. "We've heard rumors of a legal showdown with a prominent estate owner. Our readers are fascinated by stories of everyday heroes." Tessa hesitated, mindful that any public statements might fuel Huxley's anger. Still, the thought of shining a spotlight on Phoenix's ordeal tugged at her conscience. She recalled how local press coverage had helped garner sympathy. If a larger audience learned of Huxley's negligence, it might force him to reconsider dragging her back into court. After a moment, Tessa agreed. They scheduled a time for Paula to visit that weekend, promising an in-person look at Phoenix's progress. When Paula arrived, she stepped out of her car armed with a notepad and a camera, greeting Tessa with enthusiastic warmth. She seemed genuinely moved as Tessa guided her to the paddock. Phoenix, drawn by the new visitor, lifted her head and ambled closer. Paula snapped pictures of the mare's sleek coat, lingering on the scar that still cut across her hindquarters. In a quiet moment, Tessa explained how she'd first found Phoenix languishing in a rundown stall, purchased for a handful of battered bills, and nursed back to life. As Tessa spoke, Her voice wavered with the memory of that day. Paula, scribbling notes, offered a soft smile. "You've given her more than just care," she said. "You've given her dignity." After the interview, Paula asked if Tessa worried about backlash from Huxley. Tessa admitted she did, but added that she'd stand firm. "If we don't speak up for mistreated animals, who will?" she said, stroking Phoenix's mane. Paula nodded, clearly moved. "I'll handle your story with care," she promised. "We'll let readers decide where they stand, but I suspect they'll stand with you." Paula left soon after, driving away with an air of excitement. Tessa watched her taillights vanish down the road, uncertainty coiling in her gut once again. While she believed exposure could help, there was no telling how Huxley might retaliate. Night brought the quiet rustle of leaves and the gentle call of night birds. Tessa and her grandmother sat on the porch, sipping chamomile tea. Through the dim glow of the porch light, Tessa could see Phoenix dozing near the shelter, content after the day's events. Everything felt still, like the hush between storms. Tessa's grandmother reached for her hand. "No matter what comes, you have a community behind you," she said softly. Tessa nodded, gazing at the sleeping mare. She envisioned a future free of legal threats, a life in which Phoenix roamed grassy fields without fear. Under the moonlit sky, Tessa vowed she would fight until that vision became reality. In the days that followed Paula's interview, Tessa felt a strange mixture of anticipation and dread. On one hand, she knew that sharing Phoenix's story on a broader scale could stir public empathy and perhaps pressure Huxley to retreat. On the other, the risk of retaliation loomed. Even so, she found herself checking her phone repeatedly, waiting for any sign that the article had been published. She'd never sought attention, yet now she hoped that shedding light on neglect might protect Phoenix from a forced return to the estate that had once abandoned her. Morning chores provided a welcome distraction. Tessa rose with the sun, slipping into jeans still damp from the previous day's drizzle. Outside, a slight mist clung to the grass, and she inhaled the earthy scent of dew as she made her way to the paddock. Phoenix lifted her head in greeting, ears pricked forward. Though the mare still carried a mild limp, her eyes shone with a hopeful clarity. Tessa poured oats and supplements into a feed bucket, watching Phoenix eat with an appetite that would have been unimaginable weeks earlier. Each mouthful reminded Tessa of how far they'd come and how fragile progress could be if Huxley's lawyers persisted. A few hours later, Tessa drove to the community barn for a quick round of stall mucking before her midday shift at the diner. As she hauled a wheelbarrow past the ring, she overheard two boarders discussing a local news piece they'd seen online. They mentioned a rescued horse, a legal battle, and a wealthy estate owner. Tessa's heart thudded. She lingered near the fence, trying to catch more details, but the boarders moved on. Abandoning her task, Tessa fumbled for her phone, her pulse racing as she opened the news site. Sure enough, a headline greeted her: "Courageous rescue, local woman fights to save abandoned horse." Beneath it was a photo of Phoenix in mid-graze, the sunlight glinting off her rehabilitated coat. Every nerve in Tessa's body buzzed with excitement and trepidation. The article painted a sympathetic portrait, a young woman with limited means, going up against an indifferent millionaire. It quoted Dr. Jacobs on the severity of Phoenix's injuries, and it included Tessa's heartfelt explanations of why she couldn't look away when she found the mare suffering. True to her promise, Paula had handled the story with care. The piece ended with a note that the court had so far upheld Tessa's custodianship, leaving open the question of whether Huxley would truly push for a full trial. There was even a link to a local rescue organization for anyone moved to donate or learn more about equine neglect. By the time Tessa arrived at the diner, her thoughts swirled. Some customers recognized her, nodding or offering warm smiles. A couple asked questions about Phoenix, and Tessa answered shyly, not quite used to this sudden spotlight. Even the diner manager looked proud, patting her on the back and whispering that the entire staff was rooting for her. She worked through her shift on a wave of gratitude, balancing orders and refills while fielding curious inquiries. But beneath that surface glow, worry gnawed at her. If the article galvanized public sympathy, it might also provoke Huxley to act faster or more aggressively. There was no way to predict how a man used to power would react to having his misdeeds exposed. Late in the afternoon, Tessa stepped out for a breath of fresh air, leaning against the building's brick wall. Dr. Jacobs had texted earlier, applauding the article and cautioning that media attention could be a double-edged sword. Tessa scrolled through the story's comment section, heart pounding. Many readers expressed outrage at the horse's neglect, praising Tessa's devotion. Others wondered if she was sensationalizing the case. She forced herself to close the page, knowing that diving too deep into online opinions could erode her focus. The only judgment that truly mattered was Phoenix's continued well-being. Let the court of public opinion do what it may. Seth pulled up to the diner just before Tessa's shift ended, suggesting they drive back to the cottage together. He wanted to check the newly fortified fences, and Tessa welcomed the company. On the ride home, he asked how she felt about the article. Tessa admitted she was anxious, but also relieved that the truth was out there. Seth nodded, windows open to the warm breeze. "The more people see the injustice," he said, "the harder it'll be for Huxley to hide. Public pressure might keep him from dragging this out." Tessa wished she could share his optimism wholeheartedly, yet even the warm wind against her face carried a faint edge of caution. When they arrived at the cottage, Tessa's grandmother greeted them with a gleam in her eye. "We've had visitors," she announced, gesturing toward a small stack of letters on the kitchen table. People stopping by to drop off words of support, and a few even brought feed donations. Amazed, Tessa flipped through the envelopes. One held a handwritten note from a retired teacher praising her bravery and enclosing a modest check to help with veterinary expenses. Another letter simply read, "Keep fighting," taped to a small bag of horse treats. Tessa felt tears prick her eyes. With all the negativity swirling around Huxley's attempts to reclaim Phoenix, these gestures reminded her that goodness remained powerful in their community. Still, a flicker of unease remained as Tessa noticed an unfamiliar sedan parked briefly at the end of the lane earlier in the day. Her grandmother had seen it too, a dark car idling as though waiting, then driving off when noticed. It might have been a random visitor, yet Tessa's intuition warned her otherwise. She confided her suspicion to Seth, who rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "Could be someone from Huxley's side, scoping out how you're living, seeing if you're slipping up." Tessa breathed a shaky sigh. "Let them watch," she said. "We've nothing to hide. Phoenix is well cared for." Evening settled in gentle shades of pink and gold, the sky stretching wide over the paddock. Tessa took Phoenix for a short walk, letting the mare pick her path across the soft grass. Observing Phoenix's stride, Tessa saw fewer signs of stiffness, though the old injury still limited a full range of motion. Not that it mattered to Tessa. She had no intention of pushing Phoenix into strenuous activities. Their bond was built on simple joys, brushing, quiet companionship, the occasional treat. Over the low hum of crickets, Tessa confided her hopes to Phoenix, speaking as if the mare could truly understand. "Maybe we'll find a bigger pasture someday, somewhere you can wander without fear." Phoenix flicked her ear, muzzle grazing Tessa's sleeve. Together, They lingered until the sky turned deep purple and distant stars began to glimmer. That weekend, Paula's article gained traction on social media, sparking a flurry of messages. Some hailed Tessa as a hero. Others questioned why Huxley hadn't been held accountable for neglect sooner. A local radio station invited Tessa to speak on a brief segment about equine welfare, and though she stammered with nerves, she managed to explain the importance of stepping in when an animal was suffering. The host commended her determination, pledging a small donation to a local rescue. As Tessa hung up the phone, she realized how far she'd come from the shy girl who barely mustered the courage to approach Birchwood Estate. Necessity and compassion had forged her into an advocate. One afternoon, she noticed a voicemail from her lawyer. Tessa's stomach tightened as she played it, bracing for news of another legal maneuver. But to her surprise, the attorney sounded cautiously optimistic. "I've spoken with Huxley's representatives. They haven't filed for trial yet. They may be testing public sentiment before proceeding." Tessa felt her shoulders sag with relief. For now, at least, the court battle remained in limbo. Still, the lawyer warned that Huxley might simply be recalculating his strategy, waiting for interest to die down before striking again. Rather than let anxiety consume her, Tessa threw herself into further improvements for Phoenix's living space. With the help of Seth and a few rescue volunteers, she extended the small paddock into a strip of previously unused land behind the cottage. A neighbor offered surplus fencing materials. Touched by the story, under a blazing sun, they hammered posts and strung wire, creating a wider enclosure. When they finally led Phoenix into the expanded area, the mare lifted her tail in a spirited trot, testing each corner as if to confirm her freedom. Tessa wiped sweat from her brow, heart brimming at the sight of Phoenix, exploring with curiosity and confidence. That evening, Tessa collapsed in a lawn chair, arms aching and feet throbbing from the day's labor. Her grandmother brought out lemonade, while Seth cleared away leftover tools. They marveled at Phoenix, who grazed contentedly among the tall grasses in the new space, silhouettes dappled by the fading light. "She's a different horse than the one you rescued," Seth observed, voice hushed. Tessa nodded, recalling the trembling, skeletal mare cowering in the estate's neglected stall. Now, Phoenix practically glowed with renewed life. A pang of protectiveness swelled in Tessa's chest. She would let no one tear away the happiness this horse had found. As night unfurled, Tessa's phone pinged with messages from readers of Paula's article. A teenage girl wrote that she'd been inspired to volunteer at her local shelter. An older woman offered to knit warm blankets for the winter months. Tessa responded with heartfelt thanks, each note reaffirming that one person's act of kindness could ripple out, touching strangers far beyond the borders of a small countryside farm. Eventually, the cottage lights dimmed, and Tessa drifted into bed, lulled by the night's stillness. Before sleep claimed her, she pictured a future free of lingering threats, a life where Phoenix was simply another beloved companion among the countryside's rolling hills. That dream felt closer now, with every person who reached out and every small victory the mare achieved. There might be battles yet to fight, but Tessa clung to the promise of a tomorrow in which neither wealth nor intimidation could eclipse the quiet power of empathy. If or when Huxley re-emerged, she would stand ready, buoyed by the unwavering support of those who believed in second chances. Over the following week, Tessa discovered that daily life on the farm fell into a new rhythm, one marked by both normal chores and waves of unexpected visitors. Local families sometimes stopped by, eager to meet the horse who had captured the town's heart, leaving behind small donations or encouraging notes. Elderly couples offered homemade preserves or quilts, while younger children shyly asked if they could pet Phoenix, their eyes shining when the mare lowered her head with gentle curiosity. In those moments, Tessa felt the weight of her worries ease, even if only briefly. Nighttime remained the hardest, when her thoughts would circle back to the looming possibility of Huxley's legal retaliation. She had little money left to spare on court proceedings, let alone for any large-scale fight, yet she pressed on, reminding herself that every day Phoenix spent basking in the sun, enjoying a life free of cruelty, was a victory. The horse's quiet presence had become an anchor for hope and perseverance. Often, as Tessa brushed Phoenix in the late afternoon glow, she thought of how easily the mare's story could have ended in tragedy. One Saturday morning, Dr. Jacobs visited with good news. The limp in Phoenix's hind leg had diminished, suggesting that her once dire injury might still improve further. Though the mare would likely never be a competition horse, Dr. Jacobs marveled at how fully she had regained her spirit. Phoenix's eyes gleamed whenever Tessa approached, her ears flicking in anticipation of treats or a soft word. During this examination, Tessa noticed how Dr. Jacobs occasionally glanced toward the road, as though expecting an ominous arrival. Tessa understood that vigilance. Everyone felt Huxley's unresolved threat, like a far-off storm, waiting to break. But if the article's ongoing popularity had any effect, it seemed to have kept Huxley's lawyers at bay. Without warning, Tessa found herself in the strange position of local figurehead for neglected horses. She tried not to let the attention overshadow her original purpose. Whenever someone called her brave, she simply thought of Phoenix's unwavering will to survive, which dwarfed any praise. Word spread that the mare now sometimes managed a slow canter in the larger paddock, a testament to gentle, patient care. Still, Tessa woke each day braced for a confrontation that never came. She steeled herself every time the phone rang or a stranger's car paused near the property, half expecting a summons or some cold-blooded trick from Huxley's camp. As days bled into weeks, her attorney had only scattered updates, mostly that Huxley's representatives remained silent. No new filings cluttered the court's docket. Seth theorized that public backlash might be discouraging them, or perhaps Huxley had already moved on to some other venture, leaving his lawyers with instructions to watch and wait. Tessa tried to maintain a steady routine in the face of that uncertain lull. Each morning, she measured Phoenix's feed with meticulous care, coaxing the mare to exercise just enough to strengthen her muscles without risking strain. Every small sign of improvement, an easier stride, a playful toss of the mane, filled Tessa with gratitude. She wrote down these milestones in a spiral notebook, hoping to record each step toward healing. Sometimes, she reread those notes when doubt crept in, reminding herself that progress was real and no threat could erase it. Meanwhile, Paula's article continued to ripple through the community. Local youth groups proposed a small fundraiser to help pay for Phoenix's veterinary needs, and Tessa found herself invited to speak at a library event about animal rescue. Nervous but determined, she prepared a brief talk, focusing on the simple idea that compassion should never be limited by budget or circumstance. On the evening of the event, around 24 people showed up, mostly curious locals and a smattering of older students. Tessa's voice quavered at first, her cheeks warm under the fluorescent lights. Then she mentioned finding Phoenix in that dark, filthy stall, describing the horse's sunken eyes and ragged coat. A hush fell as she recounted how close to death Phoenix had seemed. By the time Tessa finished, several audience members were dabbing at their eyes, and a few stepped forward to ask how they could volunteer at the nearest rescue. That night, Tessa drove home feeling oddly at peace. She realized that sharing Phoenix's journey not only protected the mare, but also kindled empathy in others, forging an ever-widening circle of care. Back at the cottage, Tessa found a new sense of calm in each day's little tasks. Her grandmother insisted on knitting a thick blanket for Phoenix, despite arthritic fingers that made every stitch a challenge. They joked about color choices, eventually settling on a pattern of soft blues and greens that reminded them of summer meadows. Whenever Tessa fretted about money, her grandmother would point to the groceries neighbors dropped off, or the feed store's small acts of grace, like discounting the next bale of hay. In that environment of mutual support, Tessa couldn't help but feel a growing sense of belonging. The notion that she might lose Phoenix to a last-minute legal strike still lurked in her mind, but it no longer strangled her spirit. She was living proof that one act of compassion could spark a wave of kindness in return. And Phoenix, once a trembling shadow, now stood as living testimony to the resilience found in second chances. Every evening, when Tessa wrapped the new blanket around Phoenix's back, she saw gratitude reflected in those large, soulful eyes. Still, the pressure never fully disappeared. One afternoon, while Tessa was tidying the paddock, a sleek black car rolled by on the main road, slowing for several seconds before continuing on. Her heart lurched with the old fear. That night, she confessed to Seth that she worried about a sudden ambush, a court order served without warning. Seth listened intently, reminding her that she had a lawyer, documented evidence, and a community ready to defend her. "Don't let them rattle you," he said. "They thrive on intimidation. Show them you're not afraid, and their power fades." Tessa nodded, leaning against the paddock fence, watching Phoenix doze in the late afternoon sun. Deep down, she knew Seth was right. Each day that passed without a legal summons strengthened her resolve, but she couldn't deny the occasional nightmares, jolting her awake in the small hours, haunted by images of men in expensive suits dragging Phoenix into a trailer bound for Birchwood Estate. Her grandmother's soothing words often calmed her afterward, reaffirming that truth and love could triumph over even the darkest threats. In a bid to deepen Phoenix's confidence, Tessa began introducing gentle ground training exercises. Using a soft rope and a series of patient cues, she guided Phoenix around cones arranged in the newly enlarged paddock. The mare caught on quickly, her ears flicking to each soft command. Though Phoenix still favored her old injury, she moved with a quiet grace that left onlookers speechless. Occasionally, a neighbor might pause along the fence to watch, applauding softly when the mare navigated the cones without hesitation. Tessa's cheeks would flush with shy pride, but she mostly focused on Phoenix's progress, praising her in a gentle voice each time she succeeded. In those moments, Tessa sensed a bond far deeper than mere ownership, a partnership formed by mutual trust and the knowledge that they had both survived adversities no one else could fully comprehend. More than once, Tessa caught her grandmother blinking back tears as she watched from the porch. Even the goats ambled closer, as if curious about the transformation unfolding before them, a testament to renewal under kind hands. One clear morning, Tessa's phone buzzed with an unknown number. Bracing herself, she answered and heard a woman's brisk tone. Rachel Morris, Huxley's assistant. Tessa's pulse quickened at the memory of that last encounter. Rachel wasted no time. "Mr. Huxley is prepared to drop all legal claims," she announced. "In return, he expects you to refrain from further public accusations of neglect." Stunned, Tessa listened as Rachel cited that the estate wanted no further media scrutiny. "Consider this an amicable resolution," Rachel added. "He won't demand the horse's return as long as you keep quiet." Tessa felt a storm of emotions churning inside. The thought that Huxley would simply walk away, disclaiming responsibility for the harm inflicted on Phoenix, made her seethe. But she also recognized the relief that came with finality. "I'll need to speak with my lawyer," Tessa managed, voice shaking slightly. Rachel agreed curtly, stating that the offer wouldn't remain open forever. Then the line clicked dead. Left trembling with disbelief, Tessa gazed across the yard at Phoenix, uncertain whether to rejoice or grieve this sudden, morally fraught bargain. Even after the abrupt phone call from Rachel Morris, Tessa stood motionless, phone still clenched in her hand. She felt the weight of compromise pressing down, struggling to reconcile relief with anger. Phoenix's future now seemed safe, but the idea of staying silent about Huxley's neglect churned her stomach. Accepting his terms might mean guaranteeing the mare would never be threatened again, yet it also meant letting a wealthy man walk away without accountability. She gazed out the window, focusing on Phoenix grazing peacefully. In that quiet moment, Tessa realized how far they'd come and how high the moral stakes remained. She immediately called her attorney, voice shaking as she explained Rachel's offer. He listened, then weighed the options. "If they drop their claims, you gain unquestioned ownership," he began. "But agreeing not to speak out could undermine your principles. Still, many settlements include confidentiality. Ultimately, it's your decision." Tessa pressed the phone closer, heart pounding. She refused to ignore the truth. Phoenix had suffered under Huxley's neglect, and countless others might endure the same. "I need time to think," she said finally. The attorney agreed, promising to await her decision before contacting Rachel. Then she hung up, chest tight with conflicting emotions. Over the next few days, Tessa wrestled with her conscience. Nights brought restless dreams of Phoenix, locked away once more, while news stories spun illusions of Huxley's spotless reputation. She confided in Seth, who reminded her that revealing abuse could save future horses, but rejecting the settlement might reignite legal battles. Dr. Jacobs voiced similar sentiments, urging Tessa to weigh Phoenix's certain safety against the greater good of public awareness. Each opinion echoed the struggle in Tessa's own heart, leaving her torn between ensuring peace at home and exposing a larger injustice. Some nights, she stood in the dark paddock, seeking answers in Phoenix's quiet, trusting gaze. One afternoon, Tessa invited her grandmother and Seth to sit around the kitchen table, each cradling cups of tea. She laid out the terms plainly: accept Huxley's deal, securing permanent ownership of Phoenix, but binding herself to silence, or refuse, risking another court showdown. Her grandmother studied the steam curling from her mug. "You saved that horse," she said softly, "and it opened people's eyes. Hiding the truth now feels like letting others suffer in ignorance." Seth nodded, though he acknowledged Tessa's exhaustion. "Think about what you can live with," he advised. "Phoenix is safe, but can you sleep if you bury your voice?" That evening, Tessa walked out to the paddock alone, watching the sky turn scarlet at dusk. Phoenix grazed peacefully in the last rays of sunlight. Approaching quietly, Tessa ran a hand along the mare's neck, recalling the battered creature she had first encountered. Now, Phoenix's coat gleamed, and her stance exuded confidence. Tessa murmured, "You've come so far. I won't let your story vanish." The wind rustled the grass, carrying away her whispered vow. That night, Tessa finally slept soundly, waking at dawn with renewed conviction. She placed a call to her attorney, voice steady as she declared she would not be silenced, no matter Huxley's price. True to her decision, Tessa instructed the lawyer to inform Rachel that she refused the hush offer. The fallout arrived swiftly, with a coldly worded email warning of renewed legal action, yet days trickled by without any actual filing, and Tessa wondered if Huxley was simply testing her resolve. Meanwhile, donations to the local rescue spiked, and more volunteers showed up at the barn, determined to help other horses in dire need. People frequently asked Tessa to share Phoenix's story, and she discovered a burgeoning strength in speaking out rather than hiding. Each retelling rekindled the memory of that first terrible sight, reminding her why she refused to sign away her conscience. Then, on a crisp autumn morning, Tessa found an official-looking envelope tucked in her mailbox. Bracing herself, she opened it to discover a single sheet bearing Huxley's signature. The text stated that he was relinquishing any claim to the mare in recognition of her improved condition and current environment. No compensation was demanded, no gag clause mentioned. Tessa stared at the words, barely believing. The letter concluded with a curt line, "Mr. Huxley wishes no further involvement." Her attorney, contacted immediately, confirmed its legality. The horse was hers forever, free and clear. Tessa sank onto the porch steps, shaking with relief and a measure of astonishment. It appeared her stand had outlasted his threats. That evening, the cottage filled with the sound of jubilant conversation. Seth rushed over, bearing a small bouquet of wildflowers. Dr. Jacobs came by to congratulate Tessa, hugging her tightly on the porch. "You did it," the vet whispered, tears glistening. News spread quickly, and neighbors wandered up the lane, each wanting to share a handshake or a smile. Tessa's grandmother set out cookies and lemonade, remarking with watery eyes that the farm had never felt more like a true home. Throughout it all, Tessa reminded everyone that Phoenix had been the real fighter, surviving neglect to stand tall under gentle care. Each handshake underscored that they had all chosen compassion, refusing to bend before injustice. In the weeks that followed, Tessa settled into a peaceful routine. Early mornings found her brushing Phoenix's mane and checking on the mare's healing leg, which continued to show signs of steady improvement. Afternoons were spent juggling shifts at the diner and volunteer hours at the community barn, where she now guided younger teens in basic horse care. Her grandmother often teased that Tessa had become an unofficial teacher, but Tessa merely smiled, remembering how she'd once been the wide-eyed helper, longing to learn. Occasionally, Tessa would catch sight of old photos online, showing Phoenix in her gaunt, desperate state. Each time she felt gratitude flood her, she promised to keep telling Phoenix's story, hoping it would spur others to rescue horses too. One breezy autumn afternoon, Tessa looped a lead rope gently around Phoenix's halter, guiding her toward a modest practice ring Seth had helped construct. They had started light training recently, using gentle commands and rewarding each step with praise. Tessa had no intention of pushing Phoenix to compete, yet she sensed the mare's curiosity and energy. That day, after a series of smooth walk-trot transitions, Tessa paused at the rail. She led Phoenix to a low cavaletti, feeling the mare's muscles tense with anticipation. Taking a breath, Tessa clucked softly, and Phoenix lifted her hooves to clear the small obstacle. It was no grand jump, but the fluidity of her movement filled Tessa with awe. Cheers rose from onlookers, Seth, her grandmother, and a few neighbors. By dusk, Tessa cooled Phoenix down and led her back to the paddock. The mare nickered, dipping her head to accept Tessa's final pat. Later, as the sun bled into the horizon, Tessa gazed from the porch, recalling every hurdle faced. She remembered that muddy stall, the infection, and the hush offer demanding her silence. Now, Phoenix roamed safe, strong, and undeniably alive. A gentle wind rustled the trees, carrying the scent of hay and autumn leaves. Tessa smiled, knowing one compassionate choice had sparked this journey. Still shining, time drifted onward. Calls came from other farms, seeking advice, from fledgling rescuers inspired by Tessa's example. She answered each inquiry with care, encouraging them to act responsibly. Meanwhile, Phoenix adjusted so well to her improved leg that Dr. Jacobs believed she might one day carry a light rider. Although Tessa hadn't planned on riding, the possibility felt miraculous. Some afternoons, Tessa simply lay a gentle arm across Phoenix's neck, inhaling the comforting scent of warm horsehair. In those moments, she sensed that everything that had occurred, Every struggle, every setback had led them here to a place where courage and compassion intertwined.